In this video we're going to look at telos and hedonism, and we're going to define both of those terms and how they're used in ethics. Pause the video here and read this definition of teleological ethics from the Encyclopaedia Britannica. The important thing here is to notice the word telos. Now, telos in Greek means end or purpose, and its use in ethics is really important. If we take consequentialist ethics and we're judging whether an action is good or bad based on the consequences, we need to know what the consequences are aiming at producing. How do we know whether it's a good consequence or a bad consequence? So in teleological ethics, we need to answer the question, what end can justify the means? We need to think of a purpose or end that we're aiming for, and that will justify any act that we carry out. So, what end can justify the means? This is Friedrich Nietzsche saying that power is the most important thing. The will to power is what makes us human. And his philosophy, in part, inspired Adolf Hitler, who claimed that it's not truth that matters, but victory. Now, if you had a telos of victory, then any action that brought about victory would be good, because the consequences helped you secure your telos. If you had a telos of power, then any action that brought about power for you would be good, and anything that stopped you being powerful would be bad. Power might be considered an odd telos for an ethical system, but it wasn't, certainly not in the middle part of the 20th century, in which it was the avowed theory of fascism. But let's look at a more common view then. Let's say love, and this will inspire situation ethics, which we'll look at in due course. Only love is intrinsically good, according to Joseph Fletcher. Another telos, though, might be pleasure. And this goes right back to Epicurus, a Greek philosopher, who said that pleasure is our first and kindred good. It's the starting point of every choice and of every aversion, and to it we always come back, inasmuch as we make feeling the rule by which to judge of every good thing. For Epicurus, pleasure was the determining factor whether an ethical action was good or bad. We should aim at pleasure. The more pleasure, the more good. The less pleasure or the more pain, then the more bad an action was. An action is good in as much as it secures pleasure. Hedonism is the name of that theory, and a hedonist strives to maximize net pleasure. So you perform a nifty calculation of working out how much pleasure you get, how much pain you get from any action, and you minus the pain from the pleasure. The image I've got there is of a Christmas hamper from Fortnum and Mason. If you Google hedonism and try and find a suitable image, you won't. They're all very rude. This represents an interpretation of hedonism that would be alien to Epicurus. Some people think that aiming after pleasure is immoral. In this famous painting by Nicolas Poussin showing King Midas, we get a good illustration of that. Midas is the man kneeling in the centre of the picture. In this image, he is asking the god of wine and dance and song, Bacchus, for a gift, the gift of the golden touch. Midas wants to be able to turn everything he touches into gold because he thinks that that will make him happy, that will bring him pleasure. Obviously, we know that this story ends tragically when he touches food that turns to gold so he can't eat it, and he touches his daughter and kills her by turning her into gold. Bacchus, the god of wine and drink and song and the feast, he's shown as a young, fit, attractive man. He's the life and soul of the party. But just next to him, on the left of the picture as we look at it, we see an older version of Bacchus. And this shows the end result of a life that's lived according to egocentric hedonism, that's all about pleasure for you in the moment. You become fat and old and drunk, and you're no longer cool anymore. If we carry on looking down the picture, we see a woman, a mother, who's lost in pleasure while her child is drunk next to her. This is a perfect example of someone focusing on pleasure but not on the consequences. She's not looking after her child. And probably the less said about the right-hand side of the picture, the better. But this is a wonderful illustration of the problems of egoistic hedonism, of just pursuing pleasure in the moment for its own sake and having no eye on the future. This is depicted in a sculpture by Michelangelo in which Bacchus is shown as just a little bit too drunk. It just shows him at the point where he's no longer the fun person at the party, but he's now becoming an embarrassment. Likewise, in this image by Caravaggio, which is a self-portrait, Bacchus is seen holding grapes that have started to rot, and Bacchus is shown as jaundiced and ill. And this perhaps shows a weariness with the pleasure-seeking life. Epicurus knew that right from the start. I won't read out all of this quote, but I will focus on the key idea, which is that it's not the unbroken succession of drinking bouts and of revelry or sexual lust that's the important aspect of a pleasurable life, but rather sober reasoning and searching out the grounds of choice and avoidance and banishing those beliefs that lead to the tumult of the soul. Epicurus thought that moral actions were ones which brought about pleasure, but his understanding of pleasure was quite sophisticated. He believed that we shouldn't go searching after unnecessary desires. These unnecessary desires to be richer or more powerful usually produce unhappiness. Instead, he aimed more at the absence of pain, and this is important because this comes up as one of the issues arising, and he says that the state we should aim for is a neutral state known as ataraxia, which is freedom from all worry. He also makes the point that happiness is not a private affair, and this is really interesting for us because it brings ethics into the social domain. It's how we respond to other people and how we interact with other people. We can now start to look at utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a hedonistic theory. It has hedonism as its telos, pleasure as its end goal. Jeremy Bentham, the founding figure of British utilitarianism, says nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. This is the most important quote in utilitarianism. Bentham is following on from the thought of Epicurus, and he's learnt the lessons of Bacchus, and so his version of hedonism is a sophisticated one that we'll look at in the next video.